Welcome to this edition of the Million Dollar Mastermind podcast. This is where we pick the brains of high achievers from all walks of life and get their hard-earned, real-world insights on winning. I'm your host, Larry Weidel. In many ways, it's long been accepted that you want to grow personally, grow in leadership, or go to autobiographies, and you can learn so much about how people think and how they went through and how they thought. But when you study companies are really, in many ways, like human beings. They have a birth, they have a development cycle, then they have a decay cycle. And you can, then they divide up and then they go together again and then launch. Yeah. And so there's a lot of human interest. If you look at them as entities, not as these big blobs of concrete or, glacier ice mountains moving back and forth, but actually there's humanity behind the scenes. Yeah. I know that it was always fun for me to go to New York and go into the see the CEOs, and people that were number one, that like one time Sandy Weil was in charge of Citi and most powerful guy in the world. He goes to Japan. No, he goes to China, and he told me, he said, I walk in, and you walk in, it's scary. Nobody's around, this huge building. Yeah. Go into this big hall, and you walk down this hallway. Nobody's there. Don't see anybody. Then you walk into this room, massive high ceilings, and there's two chairs and a table with a plant, and there's a microphone inside the plant, and that's where the translator is. You put these plugs on. He said, you're talking to the head of China, whoever, president or whatever his title was at the time. Yeah. And, but then to hear him talk about it on a human level, or to see them when they're going through tough times, they've got disasters and they're sitting in there just like we would, in our, as a family situation, as your business situation is like, at the top of these things is human beings, and they're making decisions and following principles. And there's patterns, like you say, there's not only patterns in business, patterns in thought. Yeah. And this is where people don't, where you get into understanding culture of a company and everything. It has to do with how they go about, how they think, how they decide, what they put value on. And when you study companies, you can learn a lot. It sounds like you were learning a lot as you went.
Yeah, I did. And I'm an avid reader. I love reading books. I've read hundreds and hundreds of business books, and wrote one myself and just been around it. I'm just, it's just been kind of a nerd around business. I love it. I do love studying companies, and I'm always trying to, get better, like anyone trying to, self-improve.
And what other than have you found that you learned a lot of things, other areas of your life that you could use these principles in, that allowed you to be successful in other areas outside of the business, just because you had the thinking, you had the patterns down, and you knew how to sort through opportunities and make the best choices?
I mean, I guess observation. I would say, when I was a little kid, my dad would say that I was quiet. I would just watch, a lot. And I've kind of done that my whole life, including watching brands and watching people and watching little things that people do. And I do talk a lot these days, but I still very much watch people and listen to people and really listen to what they're saying and really pay attention. And I think that the more you observe, the more you can understand people and understand sometimes the kinds of people or the things that people are really saying. Maybe they say this, but what they're really saying is something that wasn't said, and understanding what that means and how to make decisions based off that. And that could be your internal people. That could be a prospect. Yeah. Sometimes you have a prospect, you're talking to a prospect and they say one thing, but really what they're saying is something else. And I think it's important to pay attention to that. I've often said to people that I think communication is always happening, whether people speak or not. Right. And I think it's important to be able to pay attention to the communication that's always happening.
Yeah, communication is always happening, and what is being presented as negative is not necessarily negative to the whole thing, but negative to a specific aspect of it. And I learned from the guy who trained me in business, Bullet Bob Turley, was a pitcher with the Yankees before he went into business.
Wow.
And he's very shrewd. But, when you're a pitcher and you're always reading the batters and you're reading the tells, it's like a poker game out there, the tells. In fact, a funny story, I hope I haven't told this on this before, but it's worth repeating. Yeah. Mickey Mantle would never bat unless Bob Turley, because Turley was for the 60s. He was with the Yankees when they were in their heyday. They went to 8-9 World Series, and he won 3 of the 4 games in the 58 World Series. But so he was, he was the first player rep when they had the Player Association. Everybody voted him the player rep. So prominent guy there. But when Mickey Mantle would never go to the plate unless Turley was sitting in the dugout, because in their off days they could be in the bullpen, they could be whatever, because they're not doing anything. But he wouldn't go to the plate unless Turley was in dugout, because he knew Turley would catch the tells and he would know every pitch that the guy in the mound was going to pitch before it went. And they had little signals where they could relay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that was Mickey Mantle's secret weapon. And there's the other pitchers caught on to it, and it drove them nuts. And I forget the guy's name, Moose Gascoigne and stuff. I forget, one pitcher got so furious at it one time, he just wound up and turned around and fired a 100-mile-an-hour, 90-plus fastball into the dugout to hit Turley. He said, and the cut out, he said, "Get your ass out of the dugout there. Yes, let me pitch." But being able to recognize tells, pay attention. Don't just take things at face value. But Turley taught me that, if you're ask someone their opinion, and the guy's an attorney, at least have enough brains to say, this is an attorney with attorney's filters giving me his opinion. Or if the guy's a CPA, or if the guy's a businessman who's had multiple failures, think about that and realize where he's coming from colors color his answer. Or if a guy's blue sky, he's never invested any of his money in anything, he's go this. Well, of course he's going to think it's all great because he's never put his money in anything. And so it does, some of that is like basic common sense, but you can go through life and just miss that obvious because there's so many other things to focus on, But
you're not really listening. It's like, it's like signal and noise, right? Like you really want to pay attention to those signals, and I think that it can make a big difference, and your ability to predict outcomes is better. Your ability to predict what might happen and be able to control your destiny a little bit more. Yeah,
it's kind of like watching these war movies with submarines, and you got the guy and he's listening, and he said, "That's a whale,"
Yeah.
No, that's the baby whale following the mother,
Yeah. So you got to get good at those things.
Yeah, and the better you are, it gives you a competitive edge, an advantage. And what we're trying to do as we go through business is you. You can't control outcomes. Even George Soros can't control outcomes. Giving money to things, and so they can heavily influence it, but they're going to have better odds than we are. But the thing is that everything is unpredictable. You're never guaranteed a success, but you can stack the odds in your favor. You can make it almost inevitable. And having those advantages, being able to notice what's happening. And so much business is done on the fly. And so that's why when you're trained, you're tuned into these things, you're picking up, like you say, you're moving, always on the move. It's always communicating. But in all of these levels of communication, like 6 or 7 conversations going on in 15 minutes, you could be picking up things in there that everybody else in the room, they'll never know.
Missed. Yeah.
Just because you're just, dialed into it, and competitive advantage. And so as you go out there, give give people an example of how that's giving you an advantage, or situations where you notice things, people are saying this, but you're picking up that. Do you have a big example that pops into your head from that?
Totally. So we do a lot of sales. We're B2B, right? So we sell. Richter works with many of the largest companies in the world, largest B2B companies in the world, and sometimes those are complex sales. So we're dealing with people of all levels and things like that that we're selling to large Fortune 500 companies, and in those sales that we're working on, in those pitches and things like that, you could have somebody who maybe isn't the final person that's going to sign a contract,
right,
whatever. And so when you're selling, it could be that they say something that it sounds like the thing that needs to get handled.
right.
It sounds like the objection, if you will, or it sounds like the problem, but we call it a red herring. I don't know where we got that. We just kind of made it up, I guess, years ago, but we call it red herring. It's sort of like a decoy or a wrong indication. And usually in that scenario, there's an unspoken thought or unspoken consideration or something that just needs to get uncovered, both for them and for you. And when you can hear when you can hear the unspoken communication, and you have an indication of, or you have an idea of like what that thing is, then you can go ahead and tell them, hey, listen, no problem on the other thing. Like, okay, you can handle the other thing, but then a lot of salespeople will actually go and try and handle that thing that was said.
Right. Yeah.
But the reality is that when you can hear the other thing, you can go in and say, I just want to put this out there and say, if this is an issue, or if this is something, or perhaps maybe also blah. And then once they say it, you can now handle it, right? Now you can address it and actually move the ball forward. And it's very important because it can hang up a deal. It can hang up any deal at any time, and then the deal gets stalled and it's not moving. And so that's one of those things where it's like, you have to sort of pay attention to what they said and what they didn't say. And it's important because, the sale only matters because you're trying to get an outcome for a customer. So it allows you to do the thing that you're trying to do for them, which is solving their problem,
right,
and doing a good thing for your company. But it can't happen unless you get good at doing that.
Yeah. And it's basically finding what's buried, and maybe they're not aware of it,
Right.
Maybe they don't want to bring it up. Maybe they brought it up before and it turned into a nightmare and they just kind of hang back. But whatever there's always a main issue. As we go through life and we run into problems, there's always a main issue.
Yeah.
And in business, it's usually money. And I don't want to, you hear all kind of excuses, but if you have a problem with people, usually it comes down to money.
Yeah,
and
some capacity,
some variation of that. The company's not making enough money, or I'm not making enough. The clients were overcharging the clients, or something like that. Comes into money. So it's usually pretty easy to trace down what's wrong here, and what keeps them from making when it comes to making a change, though, in who they're doing business with or whatever. What you have is entrenched patterns. And like, if you get here's one thing, like if you go into a big corporation and you need to like change their operating system, and they've got millions of clients and they've got big data, they got servers everywhere, and you're going to go in and talk to them about like it's really outdated. You know what I'm saying? You prop this jalopy of a computer's operation up for too long. But who's going to give you the resistance if you go in there and try to make the guys that are close to retirement? Yeah, they do not, and they're never going to bring it up. But they're going to say, they're going to have like here. Well, that's a lot of money there. They're going to be throwing this, like you say, red herrings.
Right.
Look at this. Right. Look at that. But the main thing is they don't want to have to do the work.
100%.
They want to ride it out as smooth to retirement as possible. Yeah. But that's an example of that. Would you agree?
I agree for sure.
And so when you go into dealing with, when companies deal with Richter, I see, you've got, what is the main thing you do? When you have holding companies, you have things like that. You have your main, and then you have, things that are support. or maybe newer, smaller, but they're growing more,
Yes.
So what would you say is the main things you're doing right now? Why would people do business with Richter?
We exist to support revenue growth for companies that are within their B2B sales journey. So when you think about pre-sales and sales and training and customer experience, and you kind of look at those from a quadrant standpoint, we have something we call the quadrant strategy. There's gaps and there's challenges within each one of those quadrants that, if they were handled and fixed, it would improve the revenue.
Give me an example. Typically, you go and you start with a company. Give me an example.
Example would be a large company like, let's say, AT&T or IBM, and they're needing to train their sales force on a repeatable model on exactly how something is done. And they've got, obviously, Pareto's law. You have the 80 and 20, right? 20% is doing really, really well. So it would be important to look at what the 20% are doing, how they're doing it, dissect it, turn it into sort of Lego instruction level simplicity, where you can build a repeatable model so the rest of the team can sort of increase their performance.
Yeah. And so when you identify, why don't companies, what do you see? What's the biggest reason when you go into companies and you get some obvious thing like that? Why can't they figure it out? Why haven't they figured it out?
Well,
I have my own ideas, but I want to hear you say.
Yeah. I mean, look, these are really big companies, and there's a lot of different sort of units within those big companies.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Yeah,
they don't even really know each other. And it's like these problems sometimes are happening simultaneously, and they do have a lot of talent in-house.
Right.
But a lot of the people that they have in-house are up to their eyeballs doing whatever they do. And they have creative talent, different things like that. But sometimes, the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours type thing. You put in 10,000 hours in Outliers, and he talks about that. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. For us, the lane that we stay in is this exact thing. So when we look at enterprise B2B sales, we put in the 10,000 hours. We know this space really, really well. And sometimes it's easier to give it to a company like Richter and say, you guys live and breathe this all the time. Let us leverage you and take this on and help with this. But also at the same time, these big companies, they have these different pockets and they're handling different things, and they're doing product launches and they're doing all sorts of things. And sometimes they're a little disconnected in different units, and they just need help. I mean, there's a lot of vendors that support these companies, right? There's the internal employees, but there's also external vendors that support them. And we happen to be one of those companies. And I think the nature of any company anywhere is that you just need good people to help in that thing, whether it's an internal person or external person. There's always fires, there's always problems, there's always growth challenges. Doesn't matter how big you are, you're not above it. The difference between a large company and a small company is that with large companies, they've already scaled. Small companies are always talking about how to scale. Large companies, they already scaled. So now it's just new, different challenges that they have to take on related to how they're trying to get to the next level of growth.
Thanks for listening to the Million Dollar Mastermind. If you felt there were any valuable takeaways from this episode, please take a minute and leave us a 5-star review. Your feedback is important and really helps us get the word out to a wider audience. Remember, we have a valuable webinar that is absolutely free. Register for it right now at weidelonwinning.com. Thanks for listening.